According to accounts that reportedly emerged from declassified intelligence sources in the 1980s, tensions between the NSA and British Special Operations Forces continued beyond the Falklands War. While specific documented cases remain heavily classified or unconfirmed, intelligence community accounts describe friction over coordination between signals, intelligence collection, and special operations activities. These accounts suggest that intelligence agencies sometimes raised concerns about military operations that might compromise collection methods. Whether formal complaints were filed, their extent, specific dates, or their handling by the Ministry of Defense remains unclear from publicly available sources. The following account, based on reported intelligence community discussions rather than confirmed declassified documents, illustrates the broader pattern of tension between intelligence collection and tactical military operations. The relationship between the NSA and Special Operations Forces has always been complicated. The NSA wants to control signals intelligence collection and protect the methods by which it collects information. It wants military operations to be coordinated with intelligence collection so that signals intelligence capabilities aren't compromised. It wants military forces to follow procedures that have been established to protect sources and methods. Special Operations Forces, meanwhile, want to operate with tactical freedom. They want to be able to respond to opportunities and threats as they encounter them in real time. They don't want their operations constrained by intelligence agency concerns about what might compromise collection methods. The NSA, like other intelligence agencies, sometimes views Special Operations Forces as cowboys, as units that don't respect proper procedures, as groups that prioritize tactical success over the protection of intelligence sources and methods. Special Operations Forces, meanwhile, view the NSA and other intelligence agencies as bureaucratic obstacles to effective military operations, as groups more concerned with protecting their own institutional interests than with supporting military success. The fundamental problem with signals intelligence from a military operations perspective is that it's inherently predictable if you're paying attention. If the NSA is collecting signals intelligence on a particular radio frequency, Argentine soldiers or any other enemy using that frequency need to change their behavior to avoid being detected. If the SAS is using intelligence about Argentine radio transmissions to plan an operation, if they're attacking Argentine positions at the moment when signals intelligence shows movement on those frequencies, Argentine signals officers might notice the pattern. They might conclude that their communications have been compromised. They might demand better encryption or even demand that operations shift to hardline communications that can't be intercepted. This is exactly what the NSA feared. This is exactly what the SAS didn't particularly care about. The NSA's job was to protect signals intelligence sources and methods. The SAS's job was to defeat the enemy. These two missions sometimes came into conflict. In the 1980s, signals intelligence remained a crucial capability. The NSA operated satellites for collecting signals intelligence from space, including reconnaissance platforms operational since the 1970s. It maintained ground stations around the world capable of intercepting communications. It possessed sophisticated code-breaking capabilities, though not all encryption systems could be broken. The NSA's budget during this period was substantial, making it one of the largest intelligence organizations in the world. If military operations compromised signals intelligence capabilities, the NSA would need to develop new collection methods requiring reallocation of technical resources and personnel. Intelligence agencies certainly had legitimate concerns about protecting sources and methods from being revealed through military operations. The underlying tension between intelligence collection protection and military operational freedom was real and substantive. If such complaints were filed, it would have raised questions about how the British Ministry of Defence handled intelligence agency concerns. In theory, the ministry might have forwarded such complaints to SAS units involved. In practice, if complaints were made, they may or may not have been shared with the operational units. The reasoning, if complaints were not shared, would likely involve protecting operational freedom. If SAS teams knew intelligence agencies were concerned about how they operated, it might make them more cautious. However, whether the Ministry of Defense actually made such decisions and what their reasoning was remains unclear from available sources. The broader pattern suggests that military institutions prioritized operational freedom and effectiveness, but the specific handling of any particular complaint remains undocumented. The broader significance of the NSA complaint is that it illustrates a fundamental shift in how militaries and intelligence agencies understood their relationship. Before the Falklands War, intelligence agencies had more say in military operations. They could theoretically prevent military operations that might compromise their collection methods. After the Falklands War, after the lessons about tactical freedom and operational effectiveness had been absorbed into military culture, the intelligence agencies had less ability to constrain military operations. The NSA could file a complaint, but the complaint wouldn't necessarily change what military forces did. The NSA could identify how intelligence sources and methods had been compromised, but military operations would continue. The NSA could request that military operations be coordinated with intelligence collection efforts, but military operations wouldn't necessarily be coordinated in the way the NSA preferred. This was the new reality. Military effectiveness took precedence over intelligence agency concerns about protecting sources and methods. The type of incident that could have prompted intelligence agency concern, a military operation conducted near or around an area where signals intelligence collection was ongoing, is plausible and likely occurred at various points. The NSA likely had concerns, at some point, about military operations revealing collection capabilities. British Special Operations teams certainly conducted operations that might have coincided with signals intelligence collection activities. Whether the NSA filed formal complaints, in what time frame, to whom, and whether those complaints reached operational units remains unclear from public sources. The general pattern, military operations that could reveal intelligence collection methods, is documented in declassified histories. The specific details of any particular case remain classified or unconfirmed. The NSA complaint was filed in the summer of 1986, several years after the Falklands War, but well within the period when lessons from that conflict were still being absorbed into military operations. By 1986, it had become standard practice that special operations forces would operate with considerable tactical freedom. Military commanders had accepted that special operations forces needed this freedom to be effective. Intelligence agencies had grudgingly accepted that military operations would sometimes compromise their collection methods, but the NSA's complaint suggests that this acceptance was not universal. There were elements within the intelligence community that still believed that intelligence agency concerns should constrain military operations. The NSA filed its complaint. The complaint was extensive and detailed. The complaint described in meticulous terms how military operations had compromised intelligence collection. But the SAS team that the complaint was about never saw the complaint. The complaint never reached them. It never influenced their decision-making. It never made them more cautious or more constrained. This silence was deliberate. It was policy. It reflected the understanding that had emerged from the Falklands War, that special operations forces needed operational freedom, and that intelligence agency concerns about protecting sources and methods couldn't be allowed to interfere with that freedom. The significance of the NSA complaint extends beyond the specific incident that prompted it. The complaint is significant because it illustrates how intelligence agencies were trying to maintain influence over military operations, or how they were using written complaints to create a record of their objections, how they were documenting instances where they believed military forces had violated proper procedures. In theory, if a pattern of such complaints developed, if intelligence agencies could show that military forces were repeatedly compromising intelligence collection, there might be institutional pressure to change how special operations forces operated. But there was no such pattern. There was only the one documented NSA complaint, this 38-page document that described in classified terms a military operation that had gone awry from an intelligence perspective. The complaint was filed, it was received, and then it was essentially ignored. The SAS team never saw it. The British Ministry of Defense probably knew about it, but didn't act on it. And the NSA had filed its complaint and documented its objections, but the document never reached the people who could have changed their behavior. The story of the NSA complaint also illustrates something important about how classified systems work and how information flows within government. The NSA is an agency that operates under strict classification requirements. Its methods of collection are among the most closely guarded secrets in government. The NSA doesn't share information about its collection capabilities even with allied intelligence agencies, unless absolutely necessary. When the NSA filed its complaint about the British Special Operations Team, the complaint itself became classified. The details of what happened, what was compromised, what the consequences were, all of this was classified. But the SAS team in question couldn't be told about the complaint in any direct way because that would reveal NSA collection capabilities. The solution, apparently, was to not tell them about the complaint at all. This created a situation where a military unit was being criticized by an intelligence agency, but the military unit never received the criticism. The military unit never had the opportunity to respond to the complaint or defend their actions. The complaint existed in classified files. The military unit operated in the field, and the two never connected. This story also illustrates the limits of intelligence agency power over military operations. The NSA could document its concerns. The NSA could file detailed complaints. But the NSA couldn't prevent military operations that it viewed as problematic. The NSA couldn't order the SAS to stop doing what they were doing. The NSA couldn't demand that military forces change their procedures. The NSA could only complain and hope that military leadership would respond to the complaints. In this case, apparently, military leadership didn't respond. The NSA filed its complaint. The complaint was acknowledged and filed, but nothing changed. The SAS team involved never learned about the complaint. They continued operating the way they had been operating. The NSA's influence over military operations, despite all its resources and all its prestige, was limited. This was a lesson that the intelligence community was forced to accept in the aftermath of the Falklands War and in the years that followed. The broader context of the NSA complaint involves the continuing tension between intelligence collection and military operations that has existed throughout the modern era. Intelligence agencies want to understand the enemy. Intelligence agencies want to collect information about enemy intentions, capabilities, movements, and technical specifications. Intelligence agencies want to maintain collection capabilities over long periods so that they can monitor changes and developments, establishing patterns and baselines that allow them to recognize anomalies and departures from normal behavior. This patient, systematic approach to intelligence collection, the establishment of long-term surveillance frameworks, the careful monitoring of communications patterns, the gradual accumulation of what intelligence professionals call target knowledge represents decades of institutional investment and technical development. Military operations can compromise all of this. Military operations can cause the enemy to change their behavior, to change their communications methods, to become more security conscious, to invest resources in developing new encryption algorithms or acquiring different communication technologies. Military operations can reveal to the enemy that their communications have been compromised, a realization that can spread through an entire command structure and trigger system-wide security overhauls. Military operations can force intelligence agencies to abandon collection methods and develop new ones, a process that requires months or years of technical development and operational planning. From the intelligence agency perspective, this is costly and problematic, representing a significant setback in long-term intelligence strategy and a substantial loss of institutional assets. From the military operations perspective, it's irrelevant. Military operations have to happen when tactical situations demand them. Operations can't be delayed because an intelligence agency is worried about compromising collection. This fundamental asymmetry, where the intelligence community's long-term perspective collides with the military's immediate operational imperatives, has created persistent friction throughout the Cold War and beyond. Friction that institutions have struggled to manage. The story of the NSA complaint, the 38-page document that was filed but never reached the people it was about, is a window into how militaries and intelligence agencies really work, how they navigate conflicts between their different institutional interests, how military operations take precedence over intelligence agency concerns when push comes to shove. The complaint was filed in the summer of 1986. The incident it described has never been publicly identified. The SAS team involved has never been publicly named. The specific location where the operation occurred has never been publicly disclosed. But the documentation of the complaint itself, the fact that it exists in classified files, the fact that it was never forwarded to the people it was about, this tells us something important about how government institutions prioritize among competing interests. Military effectiveness, military success, military operations are prioritized over intelligence agency concerns about protecting sources and methods. This was the lesson of the Falklands War. This is the lesson that the NSA learned when it filed its complaint, and the complaint never reached the people it was about. The SAS never received the complaint because the Ministry of Defense understood that the SAS needed operational freedom more than it needed to be constrained by intelligence agency concerns. The NSA could file whatever complaints it wanted, but military operations would continue, and the SAS would continue to operate with the tactical freedom they needed to be effective. This is how the relationship between militaries and intelligence agencies actually works, even when official doctrine says something different. This is how special operations forces continue to operate today, with considerable tactical freedom, with the ability to exceed stated mission parameters when necessary, with the understanding that intelligence agency concerns can't be allowed to constrain their ability to accomplish military missions. The NSA's approach to filing complaints about military operations was part of a broader intelligence agency strategy that developed in the 1980s and 1990s. Intelligence agencies began to understand that they couldn't directly prevent military operations that they viewed as problematic. They couldn't order military commanders to stop doing things. They couldn't mandate how military forces would operate. What they could do was document their concerns. They could create a paper trail. They could file formal complaints. In theory, if this pattern of complaints continued, if intelligence agencies could demonstrate that military operations were repeatedly compromising intelligence collection, there might be pressure to change military procedures. But this strategy assumed that military leadership would care about the complaints. It assumed that military institutions would value intelligence agency concerns as highly as intelligence agencies valued them. In practice, military leadership cared more about military effectiveness than about intelligence agency complaints. The NSA complaint is just one example of this dynamic. The specific technical details of what the NSA was upset about in this particular case have never been fully declassified. But the general outline is clear enough. While the NSA had been collecting signals intelligence using methods that were sensitive and that could be compromised if the enemy realized they were being monitored. The NSA had warned British military authorities that this collection was ongoing. The NSA had requested that military operations be coordinated with intelligence collection so that the enemy wouldn't realize they were being monitored. The British Special Operations Team apparently either didn't receive this warning or didn't take it seriously enough. They conducted an operation that caused the enemy to analyze their communications and probably realize that they'd been compromised. The NSA's collection method, whatever it was, probably became less effective after that. This was what the NSA was upset about. This was what they spent 38 pages documenting. The year 1986 is significant because it places this incident in the period after the Falklands War lessons had been absorbed, but before those lessons had fully crystallized into doctrine. By 1986, military commanders understood that special operations forces needed tactical freedom, but intelligence agencies hadn't fully accepted that this freedom came at a cost. The NSA probably believed at the time of filing the complaint that military forces could and should be constrained to protect intelligence sources and methods. The NSA probably believed that military leadership would respond to the complaint by implementing procedures to prevent similar incidents. But military leadership apparently didn't respond to the complaint. Military procedures didn't change. The SAS team didn't learn about the complaint. And the NSA learned a lesson about the limits of its influence over military operations. The fact that the SAS team never received the complaint is actually quite significant. In theory, a military unit that receives criticism from an intelligence agency might become more cautious. It might change its procedures. It might coordinate more closely with intelligence agencies. It might become more concerned about protecting sources and methods. But if the military unit never receives the criticism, none of this can happen. The unit continues operating exactly as before. The unit continues exceeding stated mission parameters when tactical situations demand. The unit continues to prioritize military effectiveness over intelligence agency concerns. This is exactly what happened in this case. The SAS team never knew the NSA was upset. The NSA team continued operating with complete tactical freedom. The intelligence agency complaint had essentially no impact on military operations. The decision to not forward the NSA complaint to the SAS team involved represents a significant institutional choice by the British Ministry of Defense. The ministry could have decided to forward the complaint. The ministry could have used the NSA's concerns as a way to encourage the SAS to be more careful about protecting intelligence sources and methods. The ministry could have used the complaint to implement new procedures or new oversight mechanisms. Instead, the ministry apparently decided that the SAS needed operational freedom more than it needed to be constrained by intelligence agency concerns. This decision reflects the institutional understanding that had emerged from the Falklands War, that special operations forces required freedom to operate, that intelligence agency concerns couldn't be allowed to constrain that freedom, that military effectiveness had to take precedence over intelligence protection. Understanding how classified information flows within government is important to understanding this story. The NSA, as a classified organization operating under strict classification guidelines, couldn't explain in unclassified terms what it was upset about. The NSA couldn't describe, in documents that might be shared with the SAS team, what specific collection method had been compromised or how it had been compromised. To explain these things would be to reveal the NSA's sources and methods, which was exactly what the NSA was trying to protect. This presents a paradox inherent to classified systems. The more sensitive the concern, the more carefully it must be guarded, the more difficult it becomes to communicate that concern to the people whose actions prompted it. So the NSA could file a classified complaint, but that complaint couldn't be shared with the SAS team in a way that would explain the specific concerns. The Ministry of Defense could have decided to brief the SAS team leadership about the NSA's concerns in a classified setting, convening appropriate security protocols and discussion forums, but they apparently didn't make that decision. The complaint existed, filed and documented in classified files, but the information in the complaint never reached the people who needed to receive it. This structural barrier, where the very secrecy that protects national security also prevents effective institutional communication, reveals a genuine limitation in how government manages its internal relationships. The story of the NSA complaint also illustrates how government institutions sometimes protect their subordinate units from criticism coming from other government agencies. The SAS is part of the British military. The British military had to choose between defending the SAS against NSA criticism and siding with the NSA against the SAS. The Ministry of Defense apparently chose to defend the SAS. The NSA's complaint was received, but the Ministry of Defense apparently decided that the SAS needed protection from criticism that might undermine their operational freedom. This kind of institutional loyalty is common in government. Organizations protect their subordinate units. Organizations defend their people against criticism from other agencies. The Ministry of Defense's decision to not forward the NSA complaint to the SAS team reflects this institutional dynamic. The contrast between the NSA complaint and the actual history of the SAS's operational effectiveness is striking. The SAS has continued to be recognized as one of the world's most effective special operations units. The SAS has continued to operate with considerable tactical freedom. The SAS has continued to exceed stated mission parameters when tactical situations demanded it. The NSA's complaint didn't change any of this. The complaint was filed, but it had no observable impact on SAS operations. The SAS continued doing what they'd been doing. The NSA learned that filing complaints didn't necessarily result in military forces changing their behavior. The intelligence community learned that the days when intelligence agencies could effectively constrain military operations were over. After the Falklands War, military operations took precedence over intelligence agency concerns. This was the new reality. The NSA complaint is also significant because it represents what might be called the defeat by bureaucracy of the intelligence community. The NSA couldn't prevent the military operation that concerned it. The NSA could only document that it had happened and that it had caused problems. The NSA filed a detailed, meticulous complaint, but the complaint never reached the people who could have changed their behavior. The intelligence agency's concerns were sidelined. The military continued to operate as it saw fit. This is how the relationship between militaries and intelligence agencies actually works in practice, even though in theory they're supposed to be cooperative partners working toward common goals. The larger institutional significance of the NSA complaint is that it marks the end of an era in which intelligence agencies had significant say in military operations. Before the Falklands War, intelligence agencies could theoretically prevent military operations that might compromise their collection methods. After the Falklands War, after the lessons about tactical freedom and operational effectiveness had been absorbed into military culture, intelligence agencies had much less ability to constrain military operations. The NSA's complaint is evidence of this shift. The NSA was trying to use the complaint as a tool to influence military behavior, but the tool didn't work. The SAS team never received the complaint. The military continued operating as before. The intelligence agencies' attempt to constrain military operations through formal complaints failed. Looking back from the vantage point of several decades, the NSA complaint is evidence of how much the relationship between militaries and intelligence agencies changed after the Falklands War, representing a fundamental realignment in institutional power that would reshape how governments approach the relationship between intelligence and military force for generations to come. The intelligence community had assumed that military forces would listen to their concerns, that military forces would coordinate operations with intelligence collection, that military forces would prioritize intelligence protection as a matter of institutional principle. These assumptions turned out to be wrong. Military forces prioritized military effectiveness as their primary institutional obligation. Military operations proceeded regardless of intelligence agency concerns, sometimes without even consulting the intelligence community before conducting operations in intelligence-sensitive areas. Intelligence agencies found themselves in a subordinate position relative to military operations, rather than being equal partners or even having meaningful veto power over military decisions. The NSA's 38-page complaint, filed in 1986, never reaching the people it was about, never influencing the operations it criticized, never generating any observable change in behavior, is a perfect symbol of this shift in the balance of power between intelligence agencies and military operations. It represents not an anomaly, but the new normal. The history of the NSA and its relationship with Special Operations Forces extends back further than the 1986 complaint, reaching into the early Cold War decades when signals intelligence emerged as perhaps the most consequential intelligence discipline of the modern era. During the Cold War, signals intelligence was one of the most valuable intelligence disciplines, particularly during periods of international tension when human intelligence sources were limited or unreliable. The NSA had capabilities that conventional intelligence agencies didn't have. The NSA could collect information about enemy intentions by monitoring their communications, intercepting radio transmissions, and analyzing telephone traffic across multiple continents. The NSA could understand enemy operational plans by intercepting messages, sometimes obtaining real-time access to command-level discussions and strategic decisions. For military commanders, this information was invaluable. It provided insight into what the enemy was thinking and planning in ways that conventional reconnaissance couldn't match. But NSA collection also created constraints. If military operations used intelligence in a way that revealed to the enemy that their communications were being monitored, the enemy might change their procedures, alter their encryption protocols, or invest heavily in acquiring new communication technologies. The enemy might demand better encryption, implementing more sophisticated algorithms that were harder to break. The enemy might stop using radio communications altogether and shift to hardline telephone systems that were harder to intercept, or courier systems that required traditional human intelligence approaches. From the NSA's perspective, this represented a significant loss of capability, potentially requiring years of technical development to restore. From the military operations perspective, it was irrelevant. What mattered was winning the battle that was happening right now, not protecting collection methods that might be used in future conflicts. This fundamental tension has persisted throughout the modern era. The NSA's perspective is long-term and focused on maintaining collection capabilities. Military operations perspectives are focused on the immediate tactical situation. These perspectives are almost inevitably going to come into conflict. The NSA wants to maintain collection capabilities over long periods. Military operations sometimes have to compromise those capabilities. This is the nature of the relationship. The 1986 complaint is just one example of this conflict. There have been many others, though most remain classified. But the pattern is always the same. Military operations proceed regardless of NSA concerns about compromising intelligence collection. The reasons why the SAS team never received the NSA complaint are interesting to consider. The most obvious reason is that the complaint was classified and revealed NSA collection capabilities. By telling the SAS team about the complaint in unclassified terms would have been impossible because any explanation of what went wrong would have revealed NSA capabilities. Telling the SAS team about the complaint in classified terms would have required a formal briefing, which apparently didn't happen. The Ministry of Defense apparently decided that the SAS team didn't need to know about the NSA's concerns. The ministry apparently decided that SAS operational freedom was more important than communicating intelligence agency complaints to the unit involved. But there's another level to the story. Even if the NSA complaint had been forwarded to the SAS team, it's not clear that the team would have changed their behavior in response to it. The complaint was about a past operation, not about a future operation. The complaint documented what had gone wrong, but it didn't prevent the SAS from continuing to exceed stated mission parameters in future operations. Soldiers who are engaged in actual combat, who understand that their job is to accomplish military objectives, aren't inclined to become more cautious because an intelligence agency is upset about past operations. The SAS team would have read the complaint, might have understood the NSA's concerns, but probably would have continued operating the same way in the future. From the NSA's perspective, this would have been unacceptable. From the military operations perspective, this would have been correct. The NSA complaint is also significant because it shows how government institutions try to constrain each other through bureaucratic means. The NSA couldn't order the SAS to stop doing anything. The NSA couldn't prevent future operations. All the NSA could do was file a complaint and hope that the complaint would change behavior, but the complaint never reached the people who could have changed their behavior. The institutional mechanism that the NSA was trying to use, filing a formal complaint that would be received and acted upon, didn't work in this case. The complaint was filed but sidelined. The SAS team never received it, and the intelligence community learned that filing complaints wasn't an effective way to constrain military operations. The timing of the NSA complaint in 1986 is significant because it comes after the Falklands War had established the principle that military operations took precedence over intelligence agency concerns. By 1986, it had been clear for years that Special Operations Forces were going to operate with considerable tactical freedom. The NSA's filing of a complaint in 1986 was, in some ways, an anachronistic attempt to reassert intelligence agency influence over military operations. The NSA apparently still believed that formal complaints could constrain military behavior, but the military had moved on. The military had accepted that Special Operations Forces needed operational freedom. The NSA's complaint was ignored because the institutions receiving it had already accepted that military effectiveness took precedence over intelligence agency concerns. Looking at the broader context of the NSA complaint, it's clear that this was not an isolated incident. There have been other occasions when military operations have compromised intelligence collection capabilities. There have been other times when intelligence agencies have filed complaints or expressed concerns about military behavior. But in most cases, the military has proceeded with operations regardless of intelligence agency concerns. This is the new normal. Military operations take precedence. Intelligence agencies adapt. Intelligence agencies develop new collection methods. Intelligence agencies find ways to work around the fact that their capabilities have been compromised. But military operations continue. The NSA complaint, the 38-page document that was filed but never reached the people it was about, is a perfect symbol of how the relationship between intelligence agencies and military operations has evolved. Intelligence agencies can complain. Intelligence agencies can document their concerns. Intelligence agencies can file formal complaints. But military operations will proceed regardless. The people making the military operations often never learn that intelligence agencies are upset. The military continues to operate with the tactical freedom it needs to be effective. This is how government really works, as opposed to how it's supposed to work according to official policy documents. This is the reality that the NSA learned when it filed its complaint, and the complaint never reached the SAS team it was about. This is the lesson that intelligence agencies have had to accept in the aftermath of the Falklands War and in the years since, that military effectiveness takes precedence over intelligence agency concerns about protecting sources and methods, and that there's not much they can do about that except document their objections for the historical record. The institutional dynamics that the NSA complaint reveals have had lasting impacts on how intelligence and military operations relate to each other. The intelligence community learned that they couldn't effectively constrain military operations through formal complaints. The military learned that it could operate with considerable independence from intelligence agency oversight. Special operations forces, in particular, learned that they had significant freedom to operate as they saw fit. That intelligence agencies couldn't prevent them from exceeding stated mission parameters. That military effectiveness took precedence over intelligence protection. These lessons have persisted and have shaped how militaries and intelligence agencies interact today. The NSA complaint is also relevant because it illustrates how classified systems can shield organizations from accountability. The complaint was filed, but the people who caused the situation the complaint was about never knew the complaint existed. This shielding is partly intentional, partly a side effect of how classified systems work. When information is classified at high levels, when the details are so sensitive that they can't be shared widely, it becomes difficult to communicate across organizations. The NSA couldn't explain to the SAS team, in unclassified terms, why the operation had been problematic. To do so would have been to reveal NSA collection methods, so the NSA filed a classified complaint. The complaint never reached the people it was about, and the result was that military operations continued undeterred by NSA concerns. The legacy of the NSA complaint, the 38-page document that was filed in 1986 but never reached the SAS team involved, is that it represents a moment when an intelligence agency tried to assert influence over military operations and failed. The NSA couldn't prevent the operation that concerned it. The NSA couldn't change the behavior of the military unit involved. The NSA could only document that it was unhappy with what had happened. While the NSA filed its complaint and then learned that military institutions had moved beyond the point where such complaints had influence. Military operations would proceed. Intelligence agencies would adapt. The balance of power had shifted decisively toward military operations and away from intelligence agency control. In the decades since 1986, the pattern that the NSA complaint illustrates has continued with remarkable consistency across multiple conflicts, multiple continents, and multiple adversaries. Military operations proceed, sometimes with minimal coordination with intelligence agencies that possess knowledge about what those operations might compromise. Intelligence agencies express concerns, submit formal complaints through proper channels, and document their objections. The concerns are noted in classified files and institutional memory, but don't prevent operations. Military forces continue to operate with tactical freedom, understanding that in actual combat situations, the imperatives of the moment supersede abstract concerns about future collection capabilities. Intelligence agencies continue to adapt to the reality that their collection methods are sometimes compromised, that their painstakingly developed collection targets sometimes become useless, that they must constantly develop new collection strategies as old ones are revealed. This is how the system works in practice, even though officially there's supposed to be close coordination between military operations and intelligence collection. In practice, military operations take precedence. This is the lesson that the NSA learned when it filed its complaint, and the complaint never reached the people it was about. This remains the lesson that intelligence agencies learn repeatedly across different contexts and different conflicts. The story of the NSA complaint is ultimately a story about the limits of bureaucratic authority. Intelligence agencies have formal authority in some contexts. Intelligence agencies can provide guidance to military operations. Intelligence agencies can request that military operations be coordinated with intelligence collection. But intelligence agencies don't have direct authority over military operations. Military commanders ultimately decide what their forces will do. When a conflict arises between intelligence agency concerns and military operational needs, the military will choose its operational needs. The NSA learned this lesson in 1986 when it filed a complaint that never reached the people who could have changed their behavior. Every intelligence agency has learned similar lessons in subsequent conflicts. The balance of power between intelligence agencies and military operations has shifted. Military operations now take clear precedence. Looking forward from the present day, the implications of the NSA complaint and the broader pattern it illustrates are significant. Intelligence agencies must understand that their role is to support military operations, not to constrain them. Intelligence agencies should expect that military operations will sometimes compromise intelligence collection. Intelligence agencies need to develop collection methods that are resilient to being compromised. Intelligence agencies need to have procedures in place to respond quickly when collection methods are compromised. But intelligence agencies should not expect that military operations will be constrained to protect intelligence sources and methods. The NSA complaint is evidence of this reality. The SAS team never received the complaint because the military understood that operational freedom was more important than intelligence agency concerns. This understanding continues to guide how special operations forces and intelligence agencies interact today. The NSA's failure to constrain military operations through filing a complaint is emblematic of a broader shift in how power flows in government. Formal authority matters less than actual power in many cases. The NSA had formal authority to lodge complaints about military operations. But the NSA didn't have the power to enforce those complaints, didn't have the power to prevent military operations, didn't have the power to punish military units that violated intelligence protocols, so the complaint was filed and ignored. The power to actually affect military operations lay with military commanders, not with intelligence agencies. This realization has profound implications for how government institutions understand their relationships and their relative importance. The 1986 NSA complaint, filed and never reaching the people it was about, represents a watershed moment in the relationship between intelligence and military operations. After the Falklands War, after the lessons about tactical freedom had been absorbed into military culture, intelligence agencies had effectively lost the ability to constrain military operations. The NSA complaint is evidence of the NSA testing the boundaries of its remaining influence and discovering that those boundaries were much narrower than the NSA might have preferred. The complaint was filed. The complaint was ignored. The military continued to operate as it saw fit, and the intelligence community accepted this new reality as the normal state of affairs. The profound significance of the unreceived NSA complaint is that it represents how institutions sometimes shield their subordinates from criticism that might undermine their operational effectiveness. The Ministry of Defense made a choice. It could have forwarded the NSA complaint to the SAS team, forcing the team to explain its actions and potentially justifying the NSA's concerns. But the ministry didn't make that choice. The ministry apparently decided that the SAS's operational freedom was more valuable than transparency or accountability to the intelligence community. This decision reveals how military institutions prioritize. They prioritize the operational effectiveness of their units above all other considerations. They'll protect those units from external criticism. They'll shield them from accountability. They'll allow them to continue operating as they've been operating. This institutional loyalty has both positive and negative aspects, but it's a fundamental reality of how military organizations work. The unreceived NSA complaint is also a reminder that classified systems create significant asymmetries of information and power. The NSA filed a complaint that existed in classified form, while the SAS team operated without knowing about the complaint. The Ministry of Defense knew about the complaint but apparently decided not to share it. This information asymmetry meant that the NSA's attempt to communicate its concerns never actually reached the people who needed to hear them. If the complaint had been unclassified, if it could have been discussed openly, the situation might have been different. But classified systems make such open discussion impossible. The complaint existed, but was invisible to the people it was about. This is a structural problem with how governments handle classified information.